I'm Chance Dorland, and this is The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. Something very interesting has happened as safety has become a concern in a case that has already seen a conviction. I'm joined now by San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala to get all those details. So Elizabeth, great to have you back here on the program. Let's first start with a quick review of the original case that led to that conviction that's already been issued.
Yes, it's good to be back, Chance, and this is a very interesting case. As you'll recall, in June of this year, Daniel Moreno Lopez was convicted of murder in the horrific baseball bat beating death and dismemberment and then burning of the remains of a man by the name of Jose Luis Menchaca. And this particular incident escalated from basically a drug deal that went bad between Menchaca and Lopez. And this happened back in September of 2014. And this case we've discussed quite a bit because there was, at first, Lopez's trial ended in a mistrial over discovery violations. And then when he went back to court, he was, convicted by a jury. And at that time, he had chosen to be sentenced by Judge Ron Rangel, who presided over the trial.
So we're now caught up on where everything is in the case, and now we're dealing with heightened security and quite a jump in security concerns, as you're going to tell me here in a moment. What brought all of this on?
Well, as you'll recall, when he was convicted in June, the courtroom erupted in chaos. And at that time, there were more than a dozen Bexar County Sheriff's deputies in there because Lopez tried to punch his attorney. And at the same time that this is going on, his mother and his aunt began screaming in the courtroom and they ran outside. The mother collapsed, and it was just quite the chaotic scene. And, his cousin, Gabriel Moreno, was tried this year as well. And his case actually ended in a mistrial after 4 days of deliberations through jurors, and they could not reach a verdict because, he was a co-defendant in this case. So now, as we are listening to the punishment phase of this trial, because of what happened during the conviction, the security was indeed heightened. We had at least 11 uniformed officers, Bexar County Sheriff's deputies, rather, and there were 2 SWAT officers armed with long guns. And gosh, Chance, what really happened that I've not seen before here, because he's being sentenced by the judge, there's no jurors in the juror box. So normally during a case, you have the prosecutors near the juror box, and then across from them, you have another table that is near the holding area where they bring the inmates out, and they usually sit there with their defense attorneys. But because this has just escalated into security issues, the defense attorneys actually are near the jury box and the prosecutors near the holding area because they had to put Daniel Lopez by himself in the jury box. And there he is surrounded by armed guards to make sure that he doesn't erupt into a frenzy like he did when he was convicted. He's handcuffed and he's chained at the ankles, but yet they have at least, like I said, 11 uniformed officers, and there's also several undercover officers in there as well, and you can tell who they are because you can see that they're wearing bulletproof vests. So that was pretty intense.
What kind of effect has that had on the actual sentencing phase of the trial itself and everyone who's in the courtroom? I assume this does not feel like a normal case.
No, it really doesn't, Chance, because normally you have a lot of younger prosecutors and other defense attorneys who go into the courtroom for sentencing hearings so that they can be part of the gallery and watch. But in this particular case, on Tuesday of this week, the Bexar County District Attorney's Office urged what they called non-essential personnel actually to stay away from the courtroom because of the danger that they anticipate, because we have found out that Lopez had a cell phone smuggled into the jail while he's been waiting for his sentencing. And there's talk that he was actually trying to arrange for a gun to be smuggled into the courthouse by a relative because he wanted to, quote, make national news. So this has been a very intense situation, because of that. And I can tell you, in 3 years of covering courts, I've never seen anything like this. And in speaking to a lot of my courthouse sources, they haven't really seen this at this particular extent either.
Has that information about anyone who doesn't absolutely have to be there, maybe, thinking about not being present during all this, has that changed who's in attendance when it comes to the media? Obviously, I'm speaking to you. You're doing your job for the San Antonio Express News, getting everything relayed to me. And of course, you're writing about this. That's appearing on expressnews.com and also the My San Antonio partner website. Are you seeing as many colleagues as you normally are?
Actually, yes. When this hearing began yesterday, eerily on Halloween, there was just myself and one other media person. But this morning, when the hearing resumed, there were several television cameras in there, in addition to myself and an Express News photographer. So, you see media presence in there, and you do see some members of Lopez's family sitting in there as well, but definitely the higher numbers of people in the courtroom right now are sheriff's deputies and other investigators from the district attorney's office, and also some undercover police officers or officers of some kind. But there is an extremely high security presence in the 379th state district court.
So we've discussed, this big new issue that was quite a change from the earlier part of the trial, at least before the verdict was handed out. As you've mentioned, there was quite an issue going on with that. But we can also take a moment during today's episode to talk about some new developments in this case that are really quite shocking.
Yes. Well, during a sentencing hearing, Daniel Lopez, since he's already been convicted, the hearing is basically so that prosecutors can introduce evidence that they would like, additional evidence about his character, about his demeanor, and certainly about other potential cases, so that they could either look at an enhancement for the punishment or just basically to point out the danger that could occur should he be in a situation where he could be eligible for parole. Now, he's been charged with he's been convicted of murder, so that punishment is 5 to 99 years or life in prison. So what we have learned from an eyewitness who also was involved in the Menchaca killing, in the sense that they were there when it happened, we had a witness yesterday by the name of Sabrina Cavazos, who said 2 months prior to the killing of Jose Luis Menchaca, Daniel Lopez shot and killed a girlfriend while they were at Cavazos' apartment in Pleasanton in July of 2014. She testified that a woman whom I'm not going to name right now because, frankly, there has not been a charge filed in this case, and I'm unclear as to the status of that. And I would not want to be the one to identify someone for any relatives or family members who might think that this person is missing. You know what I mean? So what we learned was that Daniel Lopez had a girlfriend, and on this particular day, he shot her in the neck, and she died. And then they moved the body. Now, when I say they, co-defendant Gabriel Moreno, who is Daniel Lopez's cousin, and Sabrina was there. They assisted Daniel Lopez in moving the body so that they could chop it up and set the remains on fire in a barbecue grill.
You're listening to The Docket, a new weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio from expressnews.com, brought to you by our sponsor, the law offices of Pat Maloney.
So she testified yesterday that she saw the woman get shot while she was laying on a couch in her apartment. And she said that she didn't understand what had happened because they were having a conversation, the four of them inside her apartment. So once this happened, Cavazos said Lopez checked for a pulse and told Cavazos to get Moreno, his cousin. And she was also told to start gathering cleaning supplies. So as she is cleaning up the blood, she said that the men then wrapped the woman's body in a large rug and they put it in her son's closet at the apartment until they were able to move it to a house, actually the home in Helotes, where 2 months later, Menchaca was killed. So while they were there, the body was cut up, and another witness testified that they had to call the police. They lived down the street from where the actual chopping of the body took place. And Cavazos said that Lopez began trying to burn the woman's hand, but it caused so much smoke that the fire department was called. So Cavazos said Lopez then decided that he and Moreno would move the remains to Lopez's sister's house that we found out this morning is on the west side of San Antonio. And at that location, Lopez and Moreno started a fire in the barbecue pit, and they burned all of this woman's remains and then put the ashes and everything that they used, in the barbecue pit into the truck and apparently drove around San Antonio throwing ashes out the window. And Sabrina Cavazos said that there was nothing left of the body. And then this morning, we had another witness who testified, who went further than Cavazos did. She is a woman who dated Lopez's sister, and her name is Vanessa Gonzalez. And she testified that when she looked into the barbecue pit in their backyard, she saw a skull and several bones, and that Lopez used something to try to crush those bones, also to attempt to get rid of them as well. So this has been a very intense case. It appears that now there's another instance of a person who was killed in a very similar way as Jose Luis Menchaca.
Elizabeth, we have a few moments left on today's episode, but after all of these details, I'm a little hesitant to ask anything else. Final thoughts on this case before we say goodbye. What a story! I encourage anyone who wants to learn more. There will be more reporting on this at expressnews.com and also mysanantonio.com. That's all I can say. What a story!
It is quite a story, Chance. We are on Thursday now, and I'm told that there are so many witnesses to discuss this new case, which again, a woman apparently was shot, killed, chopped up, dismembered, and her remains burned and distributed in several different places. Again, there's been no case filed on that, and there's a name that we haven't yet decided we should release yet because, as I said, these are some new developments that are coming up. So we have at least one more day of testimony, but Daniel Lopez faces up to life in prison. Now, it could be that prosecutors Josh Summers and Matthew Ludwig may ask Judge Rangel to maybe stack a couple of life terms onto his sentence if he sentences him to life. But we also have the added thing where defense attorney Charles Bunk rightfully points out that every witness who has testified for the state who has had knowledge of the killing of Jose Luis Menchaca and this new alleged victim probably should have been charged because they participated in some way in either helping after the killings. So he continues hammering witnesses on the stand and pointing out, in this case to the judge, that there were at least 8 people who had knowledge of now 2 particular killings. And the only people who have been charged in the Menchaca killing were Gabriel Moreno, Daniel Moreno Lopez, and his then girlfriend at the time, Candy Dominguez. So Candy Dominguez and Gabriel Moreno are awaiting trial. So as horrible as it is to talk about this case, Chance, we're likely going to be talking about it next week because we have at least one more day of testimony before Daniel Lopez is sentenced.
And a tremendous thank you to San Antonio Express News courts and crime reporter Elizabeth Zavala for putting all that time into this case so that we could discuss it on today's episode of The Docket, our weekly interview program covering law and crime in San Antonio and Bexar County from expressnews.com. Brought to you today by the law offices of Pat Maloney. For the San Antonio Express News, I'm Chance Dorland.